Officers with a machete at a security checkpoint for last night's event around 10 p.m. Eastern, with crowds gathered to ring in the new year just feet away. Investigators recovered this weapon at the scene. Alexis McAdams live in New York City with more details for us. Alexis.
John, when we were out there last night for New Year's Eve celebrations, we saw a lot of police activity there in the area as they rushed in to help those 3 officers who are now recovering. We can now tell you that this teenage suspect is being called a violent Islamic extremist who had been on the FBI radar for weeks. Take a look here on your screen. This is where it all unfolded right in Midtown Manhattan last night. You can see there were thousands of people out there when those 3 officers were attacked in that area. And it was during those major celebrations when police say this 19-year-old Trevor Bickford of Maine pulled out a machete-style knife and started swinging. He struck 2 officers in the head and injured a 3rd NYPD officer. One of those officers, John, who was hurt is a rookie cop who literally just got on the job here in New York City. All are expected to be okay. Investigators say this could be a possible terror attack. Sources tell me the suspect's own family called the police on him back in December, telling authorities that he had been planning to travel to Afghanistan and wanted to, quote, die for his religion and had an obsession with the Taliban. The machete attack now at the center of a federal, state, and local investigation.
And I want to be clear that the FBI, through the Joint Terrorism Task Force, is working very closely with them to determine the nature of this attack, and we will run every lead to ground.
And they're running those leads down right now. Mayor Eric Adams tweeted this out, saying that the officers are recovering and are an example of what the NYPD stands for, protecting their community and putting their lives on the line every single day.
Their fellow officer and subduing the person involved. The officers responded back to the locations because we still had a city we had to protect. I think it's a real reflection on how well our police officers are trained and the level of courage that they bring to this occupation.
John, as the investigation continues, that suspect is in police custody. He was shot in the shoulder, but is expected to be okay. He's being questioned and could face very serious federal charges. John?
Alexis McAdams, live in New York City. Alexis, thanks. The public defender representing the suspect in the Idaho quadruple murders says his client plans to waive his right to extradition. 28-year-old Brian Kohberger is due in court on Tuesday in Pennsylvania, where he was arrested Friday. He faces 4 counts of first-degree murder in the grisly stabbing deaths of those 4 University of Idaho students 7 weeks ago today. Dan Springer is live in Pullman, Washington, where the suspect attended graduate school just minutes from the murder scene. Dan.
Yeah, and John, we just got word moments ago that Brian Kohberger's family broke their silence finally and issued a statement. More on that in just a minute. But first, Kohberger's attorney, as you said that he will waive extradition and he is eager to be exonerated. And if he does that on Tuesday, he could be flown back here to Idaho as early as Tuesday night and in front of a judge facing those 4 charges of murder by Wednesday. Kohberger's arrest on Friday morning vindicated the Moscow Police Department, which took a lot of heat over mixed messages and just how long it seemed to be taking to make real progress. But the arrest does not end their work, and they're still getting help from the public to build a prosecution.
We got 400 phone calls within the first hour after the press conference, which is great. But we're trying to build this picture now of him, who he is, his history, how we got to this event, why this event occurred.
Part of building that picture of who Kohberger is and what may have motivated him included a search of his apartment at Washington State University, less than 10 miles from the murder scene. He's lived here since August when he started his doctoral program in criminology at WSU. Police also searched his office at the Criminal Justice Department on campus. He was taking classes and working as a teaching assistant until mid-December, some 4 or 5 weeks after the murders. A police source tells me Kohberger only got on the radar of police less than a week ago, and DNA left at the scene of the crime played a major role. But because Kohberger has a clean record and his DNA is not in the system, police relied on genetic genealogy.
And so the reality is that once you eliminate those individuals that are known to be there, you begin to dig into those that are unknown, and you can begin to put an identity with that subject.
Now to the Koberger family statement. It says, quote, "We have fully cooperated with law enforcement agencies in an attempt to seek the truth and promote his presumption of innocence rather than judge unknown facts and make erroneous assumptions. And we'll continue to let the legal process unfold. And as a family, we will love and support our son and brother." And John, will have to wait and see if they accompany him back to Idaho when he is flown back here mid next week. John?
Dan Springer. Developments there. From Pullman, Washington. Dan, thank you. For more on the arrest in the Idaho quadruple murder and what led police to the suspect, let's bring in Ted Williams, Fox News contributor, defense attorney, and former Washington, D.C. homicide detective. He's live in Moscow, Idaho. Ted, we just heard from our correspondent there. No criminal record this guy has, and yet he's accused of the worst kind of crime, a quadruple murder. How do you make sense of that?
You know, John, it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that someone would kill 4 students in the manner in which they were killed. They were stabbed to death. From all indications and what we've learned from the medical examiner, these students were butchered. And you would have to ask yourself, what kind of a human being would do that kind of a crime? But law enforcement believe, John, clearly that they have their man. They've got the DNA. They've got the white car. They're processing and they're scrubbing that car. Now, this guy, from all indication, is going to plead not guilty to these crimes. But I can tell you, and we've been told that some of these students fought back, that there were defensive wounds. As a result of that, if any of these students, let's say their hands or their fingernails have skin of cobalt under their fingernails, I can unequivocally tell you that's the alpha and omega of this case. The physical evidence, I believe, is clearly here, John.
Does motive matter, Ted?
It really does. You know, you've got this whole community, and that's the one question mark that they have now. This community has suffered for 4 weeks, hoping that a criminal or someone would be brought to justice. Now that they have Koberger on the radar screen, the next question is, why? Why would you do this? Why would you go into that home over my shoulder, and why would you kill 4 victims, 4 students, 4 promising students who had their whole life in front of them?
Yeah, it is an unbelievable story. Let's hope we get some answers. Ted Williams, live from Moscow, Idaho. Thanks, Ted. Tens of thousands of tourists and pilgrims expected to line up at the Vatican this week to pay final respects to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. He died yesterday at the age of 95. The former pontiff will lie in repose at St. Peter's Basilica for 3 days, starting tomorrow, before his funeral on Thursday. Chief Religion Correspondent Lauren Green has more from Rome.
Preparations are now underway here at St. Peter's Basilica for the viewing and funeral of Pope Benedict XVI. And it really is unprecedented because we've never had a former pope in the modern era. And so there's no protocol. For example, journalists are asking for a possible list of dignitaries who may attend. But we're also learning more about the last moments of Benedict's life. The emeritus pope died yesterday morning in his first-floor apartments at the Mater Ecclesia Monastery in the Vatican Gardens. A source close to the Vatican said that Benedict's last words were said in German, his native tongue, Jesus, ich liebe dich, which means Jesus, I love you. At the moment of death, Benedict's personal secretary called Pope Francis to inform him. Francis arrived within 10 minutes and said prayers over the deceased former pontiff. Tributes pour in from all across the globe, and President Biden, a Catholic, tweeted of Benedict, "He'll be remembered as a renowned theologian with a lifetime of devotion to the Church, guided by his principles and faith. May he continue to be an inspiration to all." He will also be remembered as the first pope in 6 centuries to resign, which paved the way for a Francis papacy. But it is in the Bavarian town of Eltötting where Benedict's passing is personal. He was born nearby. People lit candles and remembered the first German pope in nearly 1,000 years.
I'm We were proud. We were very happy that someone from Germany would become Pope. From Bavaria, very close by. Yes, yes.
It was very human, very upsetting, the passing away. Even thought it was expected. I must say, quite honestly, but he was a kind-hearted person. We will miss him.
Right now, Benedict's body lies in repose inside the Mater Ecclesia Monastery. Pope Francis reportedly earlier said prayers and gave blessings. Tomorrow, Pope Benedict's body will be moved to St. Peter's Basilica, where the faithful will be able to pay their last respects. John.
Lauren Green. Lauren, thank you. Well, as President Biden kicks off 2023 in St. Croix, America is waiting to hear about his 2024 plans. Our White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich is traveling with the president. Jackie.
Hey there, John. President Biden has been conferring with family about whether to seek re-election during this vacation. And we've previously reported that the First Lady and the family are supportive. But Biden didn't appear poised to make an announcement anytime soon. Asked what his 2023 message is for the American people. Those in the president's circle believe there's a strong and growing likelihood that he will run again and that an announcement could potentially come earlier than had been expected, possibly as soon as mid-February, around the expected date of the State of the Union. And that tracks with what Biden's chief of staff said early last month.
And but the president will make that decision. I expect it shortly after the holidays, but I expect the decision will be to do it.
Already, the administration is trying to set the 2023 tone, touting progress with one of Biden's biggest challenges, the economy. Top officials circulated a year-end memo framing the U.S. as positioned better than other major economies, with solid growth, a resilient labor market, moderating inflation, and more cost savings on things like prescription drugs coming up this month. But Republicans aren't moved.
What we saw was an administration push a story that inflation was temporary and transitory. It was anything but. And the reason is because there's horrible policies that have come forward over the course of the last 2 years here in Washington, D.C., not only the spending, but also the attacks on energy that we've seen under the Biden administration.
A recent Fox News poll showed 2/3 of Americans would prefer Biden not run again, but there are no Democratic hopefuls standing in his way.
I am not interested. I'm very excited for President Biden to run for re-election. We are going to support him.
Biden has not laid out a clear agenda yet for the second half of this term, but he's already scheduled a trip to Kentucky this week to tout infrastructure investments from the bipartisan bill he already signed last year, John.
Jackie Heinrich traveling with the president. She's live in St. Croix. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks.
The 118th U.S. Congress will be sworn in on Tuesday, and the border is top priority for the new House Republican majority. Arizona Republican Debbie Lesko joins us now with more on that and other items on her party's legislative agenda. We had your Republican colleague Kat Cammack of Florida on last night. I want to start with the same question that I asked her. If the administration, which is supposed to be enforcing the laws that you and the Congress pass, if the administration will not enforce the law at the border, what do you, as a member of Congress or as a congressional majority, what can you do?
Well, Happy New Year. Republicans already have a bunch of legislation ready to go to introduce. I have legislation myself that would reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. So when all of these people come up and claim asylum, they'd have to stay in Mexico or another safe country before they are let into the United States. We also have legislation that would require that illegal immigrants be turned back at the border if there's not enough space to detain them as required by the law. And of course, I'm one of those people that's supportive of starting impeachment proceedings against DHS Secretary Mayorkas if he doesn't do his job.
But if you do, say, try to reintroduce the Remain in Mexico policy, you know it has to get signed by the president, does it not? He doesn't seem inclined to do anything that his predecessor approved of.
Well, the public put Republicans in the majority, and so we're going to introduce this legislation. We'll see what the Senate does and what the president does. It puts him in a spot, and so he needs to start solving this crisis at our border. I'm in Arizona. It's a border state. It's a total catastrophe. I talked to the people on the ground multiple times. I visited the border. It's an absolute mess. It's a humanitarian mess for the illegal immigrants that are coming here. Girls are getting raped. Girls are being sold into sex slavery. I talked to the Inspector General of DHS. They said they're not properly vetting where these kids are going all throughout the United States. They don't know where people are going through the United States. This is a mess. It needs to be fixed, and Republicans are set to do it.
What about the economy in this country? It's teetering on the brink of a recession. Do you see a recession coming?
Well, I don't know, but we sure, as Republicans, we sure have to stop this reckless government spending, which is contributing to high inflation, which of course causes the cost of living to go up. And when people have to spend more money on the basic necessities, they have less money to spend on discretionary things, thus causing a problem with businesses. They have to lay off workers and so on and so forth. So the first thing I think Republicans should do is stop the reckless government spending. Then we also need to streamline and reform government regulations so that businesses, small and large businesses, have consistency and predictability so that they can invest. Those are the two things that I think Republicans should do.
Very quickly, you're on the Energy and Commerce Committee. Do you see any possibility of a rebirth in the U.S. energy industry?
I do. In some of the areas, I think we can get bipartisan support, and that is on renewables of some sorts, but also on new nuclear, so modular nuclear reactors, and also on hydrogen, so some of the new technologies. I know that Republicans are going to be introducing legislation to unleash American energy. I don't think the Democrats will go along with that. But hopefully they do.
Arizona Republican Congresswoman Debbie Lesko. Congresswoman,
thank you.
Have a happy new year. Watch video out of Portland, Oregon. A woman caught on camera shoving a toddler onto train tracks. The 3-year-old suffered only minor injuries. Matt Finn has details.
And John, we learned that woman has a lengthy criminal history over the past 10 years, including heroin and meth charges. That video appears to show 32-year-old Brianna Lace Workman intentionally shoving the 3-year-old onto the train tracks for no apparent reason. It happened on Wednesday in northeast Portland. The district attorney says a mother and her 3-year-old child were waiting for the train when the suspect shoved that child, who landed face first onto the metal rail and rocks. A bystander rescued the child from the tracks before a train came. The 32-year-old woman is charged with multiple crimes, including attempted assault in the first degree. The 3-year-old child suffered a headache and a mark on the face. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office tells us that the 32-year-old woman's brush with the law has been lengthy, including 11 previous criminal convictions dating back to 2011. Some of the charges include possession of meth and heroin, parole violations, failure to appear in court, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Now, this horrific shoving incident comes as frustrated business owners in Portland are calling on city and county leaders to do more to combat rising property crime in the city of Portland. A business advocacy group there says a shortage of public defenders in Multnomah County, where this train video happened, and police response times have hit levels not seen in a decade, according to Portland police data. John.
Matt Finn. Matt, thanks. Sure. An NFL quarterback playing a new position, that of hero. Tampa Bay Buccaneers backup QB Blaine Gabbert is usually the backup to Tom Brady, but last week he was a first-string emergency responder after a helicopter crash. Charles Watson has details.
Yeah, hey, good evening, John. Tom Brady isn't the only one who draws attention down in Tampa Bay. Buccaneers backup quarterback Blaine Gabbert is getting plenty of the spotlight these days after he helped rescue 3 passengers and a pilot who were involved in a scary helicopter crash landing off of Davis Islands near Tampa Bay late last week. Gabbert says he and his brothers were nearby having some fun in the water when they heard a faint noise and saw what they would later realize was a helicopter sinking in the water.
It almost looked like a crew boat in the water that had broken up into about 4 pieces, and I vaguely remember seeing like 2 yellow life jackets. So I was like, all right, we got to go check this out. They looked like they were in duress.
Minutes prior, 28-year-old Hunter Hupp and his parents had just finished a sightseeing tour of Tampa Bay. They were returning to the airport with the pilot when, according to police, they heard a loud banging noise. The helicopter then lost power and plunged into the bay moments later.
At this point, the whole entire thing is submerged. I am fully underwater. It's one of those movie scenes where you take your last breath up in the little bubble that's left. And you know that was your last breath.
Hey, we just had a helicopter go down off Davis Island.
That was audio of Gabbard calling police before he and his brothers raced to help. They pulled Hupp and his parents to safety on their jet skis. This is body cam video from the Tampa Bay Marine Unit as they rescued the pilot from that water crash.
They were healthy, scared, nervous, but, you know, it was a pretty crappy situation that turned good in the end. So I was just right place, right time.
The FAA and NTSB say they are helping with the investigation. As for Gabbard, he says he was expecting to stay anonymous, so he's still getting used to all of the extra attention. John?
Yeah, no backup now, at least not that kind of. Leader Kevin McCarthy reportedly holding a call with members of the House Republican Conference this afternoon. He's facing strong opposition from a handful of GOP lawmakers as he fights to become Speaker of the new House when the Congress votes on Tuesday. Alexandria Hoff has details on that from Washington.
Well, Kevin McCarthy, as the outgoing House Minority Leader, won an initial leadership vote among House Republicans back in November. In order to become Speaker, he must secure 218 votes. So that's going to be the first order of business when the Republican-controlled 118th Congress convenes on Tuesday. While there are Republicans who feel McCarthy is still dozens of votes short, GOP Congressman Darrell Issa said today he feels that number has dropped.
That has dwindled down to single digits, with a couple of people saying they'll never vote for him. But at the end of the day, recognizing that if 5 or 6 people hold out, all we're really doing is empowering the other side and not having a speaker, because there's no question over 200 members, Republican members, will stick with Kevin McCarthy again and again and again.
Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs is among those vowing not to support McCarthy. In fact, he plans to challenge him for the speakership.
Right now, nobody has 218 votes, which is the magic number, and I don't believe we're going to see that until January 3rd, and it'll take maybe even take a few ballots to shake that out.
If there is no majority winner after the first ballot, the House will keep voting until there is. No speaker vote has gone to a second ballot in 100 years. Now, McCarthy can only afford to lose 4 votes, so that means even the embattled newly elected Congressman George Santos, who has admitted to fabricating his resume, is a vote that McCarthy needs. John?
Alexandria Hoff from Washington. Alex, thanks. For more on the likelihood of House Republicans coming together and choosing Kevin McCarthy to be the next Speaker of the House, let's bring in Charlie Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor. There's something of a circular firing squad that's at least been lining up among the GOP caucus in Washington. Maybe they haven't actually fired the shots yet. What do you think the prospects are here, Charlie?
Well, certainly, without a doubt, Kevin McCarthy has a tough hill to climb, and that's just his job in general, trying to manage such a small majority. But of course, he's got an equally tough hill to climb, just getting the speakership. The problem, though, is that for as many people as who in the House, Republicans, who say they're not going to vote for McCarthy, there are just as many, if not more, Republicans saying they're not going to vote for anybody but McCarthy. And all of those people, they stake out those positions. They're going to hold them fast. But then once voting starts, these things get very different. Every speakership race I've ever covered, there have always been these holdouts. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult right now because you're talking about a new, someone new to the position. It's not like Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, every new Congress, she faced defectors, people who are never going to support her. It's a lot tougher here, but the problem with the Never McCarthy people is that they don't even have an alternative that any significant number of people supports. Well, so I still, my bet is still that McCarthy is going to figure out a way to pull this off. But as you point out, it's a tough hill for him.
Congressman Andy Biggs seems to want to be a challenger again, but he was already defeated in the first go-around of voting, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, and that's a real problem. The number of people, and even some of the people who do not support McCarthy, who support people like Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan has no interest, or has expressed no interest publicly that he even wants the job. So even Andy Biggs has trouble getting support from the people who don't particularly like McCarthy. So at the end of the day, that's why if I were to have to bet one way or the other right now, my bet is still with Kevin McCarthy, but he's going to go through a pretty tough process. And by the way, it's worth noting, this is something that he has been working on for years. This is something that he has courted these people for years. This has been a long project of his, and he has done a very good job of lining up a lot of these more conservative Republicans in the caucus to get behind him. But obviously we'll see if he can get the number needed, because without the 218, you don't get the gavel.
Well, I'm asking you, I guess, to climb into the heads of the reluctance here. But what is it about McCarthy that they don't like?
I think that their concerns are that there have been some major fights that he has not held fast on. They're not as inspired by him as they are by a lot of these others, like, again, Jim Jordan, who is leads the Freedom Caucus and has been a powerful member more on the conservative flank of the party. But like I said, if somebody like Jim Jordan doesn't want to, and Kevin McCarthy has done such a good job of courting people like Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene and people like that to sort of keep them, at the very least, to keep their powder dry and for the time being. So that's going to be, but I do think at the end of the day, the real problem for these people that say that they don't want to vote for McCarthy, the idea of throwing a wrench in the works and not having a speaker at all and not being able to get anything done is going to put a lot of pressure on them to figure out some way to get to 218.
Doesn't make the party look good if they can't even come up with a speaker. Mike Lawler is a Republican who defeated a noted Democrat in this last go-around. He's going to be a brand new member of the next congressional class. Here's what he had to say about appealing to the American voter. Listen.
I won in a district with 70,000 more Democrats than Republicans. It's a district Joe Biden won by 10 points. And we defeated the chair of the DCCC. And I did it by talking about the issues that matter to people regardless of their political party. And that's mainly affordability and public safety. And if we put forward the agenda that we ran on and won on, then the Democrats are really going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place.
What do you think about that advice? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, convening hearings about, Joe Biden and his son and the origin of the COVID virus and things like that. Are those the issues that the American people want the Congress spending its time on?
No, I think that the biggest, and this is the big pressure, John, for all Republicans to get the speakership race behind them. And the reason is because they have to talk about things like crime. They have to talk about things like the open border, and they have to talk about the pocketbook issues that the American people care about. Now, that does not mean that they should not pursue investigations into the corruption within the Biden administration, but they have to pursue those things every time in terms of how it makes people's lives at home more difficult, how those corrupt relationships with China and with Mexico or with Ukraine make people's lives more difficult back home. They have to focus on that in those investigations.
Yeah, and I didn't mention the Afghanistan withdrawal, and there are a lot of especially veterans upset about that as well. Charlie Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor, Fox News contributor as well. Charlie, thank you.
Great to see you.
Administration push a story that inflation was temporary and transitory. It was anything but. And the reason is because there's horrible policies that have come forward over the course of the last 2 years here in Washington, D.C., not only the spending, but also the attacks on energy that we've seen under the Biden administration.
That's Congressman Brian Stile on inflation, which is down from its 40-year high in June, but still well above 7% year over year. Here with more on how new challenges in the new year could affect the economy, former U.S. International Trade Commission Chief Peter Morici. He's also an economist and business professor at the University of Maryland. So, Professor, it is the first day of a brand new year. When you look down the road, 6 months, for instance, where do you see the U.S. economy?
This is going to be a year of much slower growth. The economy is already slowing down. It's not good for Mr. Biden to be touting that because the facts are going to be quite different than what he's saying is going to happen. Inflation will get a little better, but it's not going to go down to 2% like the good old days unless the Fed pushes us into a recession, unless the Fed raises interest rates enough to slow the economy down enough to get inflation to 2%.
Well, and that's the game, isn't it? To try to choke the economy a little bit to bring down inflation, but not kill it?
Well, it would be nice if that was possible. But, in November, which is the latest data we have, farm prices are up 23% year over year. That's going to filter into what you see at the grocery store. A lot of folks are going to look at the inflation numbers that are going to come out next month, which aren't going to be all that bad. But then they're going to go to the grocery store and they're going to have sticker shock. My feeling is that inflation is going to continue to be a problem, and the Fed is going to have to be very resolute to get it under control.
Yeah, we have a graphic that shows some of the food inflation numbers over the last year. These are numbers from November compared with the previous November. Meat's up almost 7%. Eggs, an incredible 49%.
Yeah.
Fish, 6.5%. Milk, 14.7%. Fruits and vegetables, almost 10%. And coffee, almost 15%. And we're all feeling it. You see those numbers when you go to the grocery store, Peter.
Last year, about a third of the Ukrainian harvest didn't get out into global wheat markets. We can expect they're just going to plant less, given the circumstances there. American farmers have been in a drought for the last 20 years in the West, and that's going to continue. We're seeing problems with everything from coffee to Christmas trees in terms of agriculture because of climate change. You can't get around that. And you put on top of that the war, grocery prices are going to continue to be a problem. But there's other pinch points in the economy. For example, the airlines have shortages of not just pilots, but planes. So, air travel is going to get a lot more expensive. Hotels continue to have staffing problems. Their only alternative is to raise their, the wages they pay and so forth. That's going to go up. If you look at wages, overall wages are outrunning productivity by so much, it's absolutely inconsistent with keeping inflation under control. Fed Chairman Powell focuses on the service sector a lot because of that.
Very quickly, would a revived energy sector help any of this in this country?
Yes, because there's a lot of capacity there we're just not using. We can get a lot of energy without a lot of labor. It's that simple. But unfortunately, this president is against the energy sector, and we continue to have refinery problems. We have a lot of problems in terms of just refining the oil we have, but producing more oil off of federal lands would help a great deal.
Peter Morici, always good to get your expertise on this. Peter, thank you.
Take care.
Well, Ukraine under more